constant humiliation, zero job security, and mandatory proximity to axes. Welcome to the utterly delightful existence of a medieval court jester, where your entire career hinges on making fun of the same person who decides whether you keep your head. The year is 1328, and Lyle Chambers has the distinct honor of being the royal fool for King Edward III of England. What most people don't realize is that being a professional idiot requires tremendous intelligence. You need to be quick-witted enough to amuse temperamental royalty, educated enough to reference classical works, and politically savvy enough to know exactly how far you can push a joke before your comedic timing becomes a literal deadline. Consider Lyle's morning routine. While nobles and knights prepare for battle by donning armor, Lyle prepares for his daily war by putting on a costume with bells that announces his location to everyone within earshot. His multicolored outfit of red, green, and gold is designed to make him look utterly ridiculous, complete with a three-pointed hat adorned with those same infernal bells. There's nothing quite like trying to sneak away from an angry monarch when your entire outfit screams, "The fool is escaping this way. Rise and jingle." Lyle mutters to himself every morning, knowing that his professional uniform essentially translates to, "Please mock me, I beg you." But the mockery isn't the worst part. It's the precarious nature of the entire arrangement. You see, court jesters occupied a strange position in medieval hierarchy. They were one of the few people permitted to criticize the king under the thin protection of humor. This was both a privilege and a death trap. Imagine your entire job description requiring you to make jokes about the most powerful person in the realm, a person with a notorious temper who could have you executed with a slight nod. One particularly tense Tuesday, King Edward was in a foul mood after receiving news that the French were making territorial advances. The court fell silent as the king brooded on his throne. The atmosphere was thick enough to cut with a royal sword. Everyone knew someone needed to lighten the mood, and all eyes turned to Lyle. "Well, go on then," whispered a nearby courtier. "Earn your keep." Lyle stepped forward, bells announcing his approach like a death knell. "Your Majesty seems troubled today. Perhaps you're worried the French will take more of your territory? I wouldn't concern yourself. After all, the way you've been taxing your subjects, soon there won't be anything left worth taking." The court gasped. The king's face remained impassive for 3 excruciating seconds before erupting into laughter. Lyle's shoulders relaxed slightly, having successfully navigated another brush with potential beheading. This was the jester's daily tightrope walk, crafting jokes sharp enough to be funny but not so pointed they'd be your last. Historical records show that many jesters met unfortunate ends when their humor failed to land. The 13th century jester Roland Le Péteur, who specialized in, shall we say, musical performances of the flatulent variety, reportedly died after performing for King Henry II when a joke went too far. Whether this is true or apocryphal, the message remains clear. Funny or die wasn't just a concept, it was literally the job description. Contrary to popular belief, jesters weren't merely simpletons hired for slapstick humor. Many were highly educated individuals who served as unofficial advisors. They used their unique position to deliver uncomfortable truths wrapped in jest. Archie Armstrong, court jester to James I of England, once saved a man from execution by making the king laugh so hard he granted clemency. The problem? When you're the only person who can speak truth to power, you become responsible for preventing royal blunders through punchlines. Yesterday, Lyle recounts to a kitchen maid, "I had to convince His Majesty not to double grain taxes in the northern counties by pretending to be a starving farmer who'd resorted to eating his own hat. I ended by suggesting that next year's royal revenue might consist entirely of chewed felt if he proceeded with his plan." "Did it work?" the maid asked. "Well, I'm not currently being fitted for a noose, and the northern counties still have their grain, so I'd call it a successful day at court." The physical demands of the job were equally taxing. Jesters were expected to be accomplished in numerous skills. Singing, playing musical instruments, juggling, acrobatics, storytelling, and mimicry. Lyle had spent years perfecting the art of tumbling, often practicing until his body was covered in bruises, all to execute a perfect pratfall that might earn a royal chuckle. Nothing says dignity like a grown man doing cartwheels and bells, and motley to distract a king from declaring war. Lyle mutters while nursing a sprained wrist from yesterday's performance. And let's not forget the living conditions. While the nobility resided in the more comfortable areas of the castle, Lyle was given a small, drafty chamber near the kitchens. The arrangement had its advantages, proximity to food and warmth from the cooking fires, but also meant he was constantly at the beck and call of the court. Medieval jesters often slept in servants' quarters or, worse, in the great hall among the dogs. One of the most ironic aspects of the jester's role was that while they were considered lowly entertainers, they were also among the few who traveled extensively with their royal employers, witnessing historical events firsthand. Lyle had been present at more diplomatic meetings than most nobles, hiding profound observations behind his foolish grin. During a tense negotiation with French envoys, Lyle observed what no one else dared mention, that the chief French diplomat kept touching his ear when discussing certain territories, a clear tell that he was lying. Rather than pointing this out directly, Lyle performed a mocking impression of the man, exaggerating the ear-touching to ridiculous proportions. The king caught on immediately, adjusted his negotiating strategy, and later rewarded Lyle with a small pouch of silver coins. The only person in court who must pretend to be stupid to prove they're smart. Lyle sighed, counting his earnings. Though I suppose it's better than being truly stupid and thinking you're smart, like most of the nobility. Perhaps the cruelest irony of the jester's existence was that they were simultaneously the most visible and the most overlooked person at court. They were expected to be omnipresent yet invisible, speaking only when commanded to entertain. Lord Canterbury was discussing his new tapestries today. Lyle tells another servant. He walked right past me and mentioned how he'd paid 40 silver marks for them. 40. Meanwhile, I'm mending the same motley I've worn for 3 years because apparently, the royal treasury can afford solid gold candlesticks but not a new outfit for the fool. The servant nodded sympathetically. At least people remember the candlesticks. True. No one chronicles the great deeds of jesters, do they? And lo, in the year of our Lord 1328, Lyle the fool did trip spectacularly while carrying a tray of sweetmeats, causing the Duchess of York to laugh so heartily she snorted wine through her nose. Somehow that never makes it into the official records. Historical evidence confirms this erasure. While we know the names of many medieval jesters, Triboulet of the French court, Will Sommers who served Henry VIII, and the female jester Mathurin who entertained Henri IV of France, their contributions were rarely documented with the same reverence as those of other courtiers. Their jokes, which often contained more political wisdom than formal council meetings, disappeared into the ether once the laughter faded. The financial compensation rarely matched the risks involved. While some fortunate jesters received decent stipends, many were paid primarily in food, clothing, and lodging. Job security was non-existent, with employment contingent entirely on the monarch's continued amusement and goodwill. When King Edward fell ill with a fever one winter, Lyle spent 3 anxious weeks wondering if the heir apparent would retain his services or if he'd soon be performing in taverns for scraps. The problem with making your living by mocking authority, Lyle explained to Catherine Kessler, a kitchen maid he'd grown fond of, is that when authority changes, your entire repertoire becomes obsolete overnight. I've spent 5 years learning exactly which jokes about French fashion make King Edward laugh. If Prince Edward takes the throne, I'll need to start from scratch with his preference for jests about hunting mishaps. Catherine squeezed his hand sympathetically. Perhaps you could find another profession? Lyle laughed bitterly. And what would that be? After years of professional foolery, my resume consists entirely of juggling skills and an encyclopedic knowledge of puns. not exactly qualification for respectable employment. Beyond the professional hazards, jesters faced social isolation. They existed in a liminal space, not quite nobility, not quite servant. Too educated for the lower classes, but too lowly for the upper classes. Their role required them to be the perpetual outsider, observing court life but never fully participating in it. You know what the worst part is? Lyle confided to Catherine one evening as they shared a rare moment of privacy in the castle gardens. Everyone expects me to be amusing at all times. I once mentioned at supper that my mother had died, and Lord Humphrey asked if that was the setup to a joke. Some jesters did manage to leverage their unique position into power and wealth. Archibald Armstrong, jester to King James I, amassed considerable fortune by exploiting his access to the king, accepting bribes to influence royal decisions. But for every Armstrong, there were dozens of anonymous jesters who lived and died in relative poverty, their wit forgotten as soon as they were replaced. The final insult? After a lifetime of amusing others, many jesters were denied proper burials, their graves unmarked or their bodies disposed of with little ceremony. The same kings who had laughed at their jokes for decades often couldn't be bothered to attend their funerals. As fate would have it, Lyle survived King Edward's illness and continued as court jester for another 7 years before the monarch gifted him a small cottage in recognition of his service. A rare happy ending in the jester profession. On his final day at court, Lyle performed one last time, ending with a joke that had the entire hall roaring with laughter. As the applause died down, he bowed deeply and said, "They say the fool's privilege is to speak truth to power. But the truth is, we fools have no privilege at all, except perhaps the privilege of dying with a better sense of humor than the rest of you. So the next time you think being the life of the party sounds like a fun job, remember Lyle Chambers and his jingling colleagues throughout history, the men and women who perfected the art of making others laugh while swallowing their own pride, security, and occasionally their fear. The medieval court jester, history's original underpaid, overworked entertainer, proving that dying on stage wasn't just a metaphor. It was an occupational hazard.